Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you and your families had a very happy Easter. This is our social studies segment for the week. We are still working in Chapter 8, Lesson 1. What I'd like to talk a little bit more about today is the transportation means in the early 1800s. Our country was just starting out. The people, as you know, previously traveled by wagon, horse-pulled wagons. And so they needed a way to make it faster to cross over to get out to the west and haul their items, not just the beaten down paths such as the Oregon Trail. They wanted new ways to move items and people faster. So our government started with the first national roads, which were built from Maryland to Illinois. That way it allowed them to cross the Appalachian Mountains and get out to the Ohio Valley area, which was a great farming area and still is. And so that allowed people, these roads, paved roads, allowed people to move themselves and their goods a lot faster than it had been done. And as the population grew out west and people moved and established farms, as you should have read about or will read about, they started growing a lot of different items, a lot of different crops, a lot of different farm items such as cows and pigs and what have you. Well, they had to have a way to move their items to the market to be sold or traded. And so what they did was they tended to load them on flat boats and send it down the rivers until it reached, of course, the Mississippi River down to New Orleans. And then once it reached New Orleans, it was loaded on other boats and it would travel up the East Coast and get back to the East for their tools and other manufactured items that the people needed. So this was very time consuming, very expensive. So they needed to come up with a way that was faster and cheaper to move their items. So one of the ways of getting around that was the government said, hey, let's build some canal systems and let's connect some of these waterways to move the items faster. So they started on the Erie Canal, which linked the Hudson River out in the east to Lake Erie. And so they were able to move by boat then a lot of people and products, and transportation got faster. And settlers began moving west at a greater rate. And then finally they decided, hey, this is working, but we need another means. And they had come up with the steam engine. And so they said, hey, the railroads, if we can build the railways, then people can move it even faster. So they came up with a railroad system, and those grew and became very popular in moving people and items out west, which was way cheaper and way faster. And so what I'd like to do now is to complete page 272 in your book. So if you want to take a second, grab your book. All right. We're going to complete that chart that says transportation in the early 1800s. And some of that has been done for you. They've given you some advantages and they've left out maybe the disadvantages or what have you. But I'd like for you to have the right answers on page 272. Okay? So the first thing on the top of the chart is the form of transportation they talk about is the roads. Roads, of course, can go anywhere, and those roads at that time were the direct route or the only direct route from the west back to the east. The disadvantages, here we go. The disadvantages was that the wagons moved slowly. If you can imagine being pulled by horse or by oxen, everything trudged along very slowly. The other thing was these roads were expensive to build. They didn't have technology like we have now. And so a lot of it was done by hand. They had to clear, forests and what have you, and then come back and lay concrete down or whatever it was at the time that they were laying. It was very time consuming and expensive. Okay, so two disadvantages for the roads: move slowly, expensive to build and maintain. All right, the next form of transportation was the canals, of course. The very first being the Erie Canal. And let's go to its advantages first, because that's what you're going to need to know. The first was it carried the freight from location to location faster and cheaper than previous forms of transportation. So carried freight faster and cheaper. Okay. The second advantage to the canal system was that the farmers in the Ohio Valley could start shipping their grain directly east. It didn't have to go down the Mississippi River and come back all the way up the East Coast now. It could go directly east across the Erie Canal. And of course, the disadvantages they gave you is the route has to follow a waterway, and they were very expensive to build. Lots of time, lots of manpower involved in those waterways, to build those waterways. Okay, and the last form of transportation mentioned on 272 is the railroads, of course. The advantage is that the tracks could be laid down anywhere, even hilly terrain. Okay, even hilly lands, they could put tracks that go up and down the hills, as you see today. Okay, and the other advantage is that farm products could travel directly to the markets that way. They could put it on a railroad car and send them directly back east. So they didn't have to go through a middleman of transporting their stuff around or down. They could just load up the railroad cars and send it back east. All right. Now, some disadvantages to the railroad was, first and foremost, they were expensive to build. The railroad, expensive to build. And secondly, they were expensive to run or maintain because the locomotives were not cheap. Okay. All righty. So that completes our lesson for today. If you have any questions, I am just an email away. Please feel free to email me, and have a good rest of the week, guys. Take care.